There's a strange feeling you get from playing a record. When the needle drops and that faint crackle kicks in those first few seconds, there's always a moment of suspense, the thought that the arm might slip, that the music might never see itself through. When we listen to something digitally, we tend to want the same experience over and over again. Digital media allows us to relive sonic experiences in higher definition, closer to the original sounds produced in the studio. But what's to be said for the crackle of the record, the imperfections in the tape? Are we missing something? The music of the Penguin Cafe Orchestra is about as strange, patchwork and enigmatic as the band's name and album artwork. Caught somewhere between Beatlesque pop, minimalism, folk and classical revival, over 5 albums the group developed a cult following and an unmistakable sound. You're most likely to encounter them in advertisements or indie movie soundtracks, but get past the quirky aesthetic and you find yourself in a soundscape with as much shade as there is light. Take a listen to the first track on their debut album, Music from the Penguin Cafe, the cynically titled Penguin Cafe single. An instrumental, like the vast majority of their songs, it initially sounds like a jaunty take on early 70s pop, with its soft electric guitar and keys accompanied by a string quartet, playing repeated bluesy riffs arranged in a typical structure. But then you get to the 2-minute 20 seconds mark, and this happens. It's as if the radio signal's dropped out, or the tapes come unspooled, and suddenly we're in the Twilight Zone, or the cosmic wasteland of Pink Floyd's Echoes. It's an incredibly odd, bold way to start an album, disrupting the comforting conventions of rock and roll with an assault from the avant-garde. But there's no better introduction to a band like this. In 1972, the group's founder, Simon Jeffs, suffering from food poisoning in the south of France, had a vision. He found himself in a dystopian landscape, a block of concrete rooms surveyed by a huge Orwellian eye. Each room housed a different symptom of an overly mechanised, regulated society, what Jeffis referred to as a cold order. A few days later, lying on the beach, Jeffis was again struck by something, this time a few lines of poetry. "I am the proprietor of the Penguin Cafe. I will tell you things at random." This juxtaposition of the random and organic with the regular and mechanical, captured perfectly in the group's name, is the through line across their 25-year history. Jeffis had spent several years after leaving music college trying to find a place in the musical mainstream. He had produced a couple of rock records with Rupert Hine, and even flirted with the idea of being a pop reggae vocalist. The PCO's first proper gig was as the support act for Kraftwerk, capitalising on the wave of experimentation facilitated by punk. In later years, Jeffs would even produce a string arrangement for Sid Vicious's version of My Way. But in contrast to the clockwork regularity of the German electronic group, what's most unique about Penguin Cafe Orchestra, I think, is the moments where things break down. My favourite track on the first album has to be the heartbreakingly titled "The Sound of Someone You Love Who's Going Away and It Doesn't Matter." Similar to the opening track, it contains a strange mix of order and disorder, but here put to more devastatingly personal effect. The title serves as a pretty handy guide and summary of the song itself. It starts with a gentle, tender guitar part, evocative of Nico and the Velvet Underground's collaboration. The strings add an element of classical romance, with dynamic ebbs and flows, until something slightly off starts to happen. The strings build in intensity in the second section, and tonality goes out the window. Finally, we have calm again. In just under 12 minutes, we hear the musical representation of a relationship collapsing, from calm affection, building tension to a climax of pain and frustration, before entering a period of acceptance and resolution. Pretty dark stuff for a group that uses anthropomorphic penguins as their mascots. But the beauty of a Penguin Cafe Orchestra song is always counterbalanced by fragility, the feeling that things could break down at any moment, no matter how simple. I don't like the idea of music that is all tranquility without that being balanced by struggle, Jeff said. That doesn't quite ring true. I feel that if you block out the heavier, more uncomfortable emotions, then at the same time you block out really joyful ones. There's a very handmade DIY quality to their music. Jeff's built his recording studio in an old garage after all. The tactility of the Penguin Cafe Orchestra is front and centre in their most famous songs. Telephone and Rubber Band, off their self-titled second album, is pretty self-explanatory. The main motif is built from a combination of a landline phone's ring and engage tones that Jeff's recorded in a call. A rubber band provides the bass line, from which a guitar part organically emerges before strings enter, doubling the phone part. An early example of sampling, it also sets the precedent for their other renowned piece of recycled music. While touring in Japan, Jeffs came across an old harmonium, discarded in the street, a reed organ powered by a manual air pump. He rehomed the instrument and, after experimenting with it, wrote Music for a Found Harmonium. Developed in France in the 19th century, the harmonium was introduced to the Indian subcontinent through colonial expansion, where it was transformed from a staple of Christian repertoire to a vital ingredient in Indian devotional music. Its transcontinental and transgeneric heritage is audible in Jeff's piece, where an opening drone gives way to a lively folk jig that has since been adopted by traditional folk bands all over the world. The folk element of Penguin Cafe Orchestra is crucial to its sound and its underlying ethos. In a landscape where technology influences not only the sound but the structure of music, depending much more on duplication and repetition, the organic nature of folk sticks out like a sore thumb. Practically every culture has its traditional music, which has survived for generations not through recorded media but communal inheritance, providing continuity and a basis for improvisation. But as music developed from a local ritual practice into an increasingly urbanised commercial entity, this fluid culture risked being lost entirely. This was the fear of many classically trained musicians, aware of the attention that their art was taking away from folk performers. Ralph Vaughan Williams and Gustav Holst, two of the most influential English composers of the early 20th century, travelled up and down the country to conduct a survey of local strands of folk music, transcribing traditional songs in hopes of preserving them for future generations, and integrating elements of folk style into their own work. Jeff's travels similarly brought him in contact with the musical traditions of many different cultures, which served as points of inspiration for his English folk revival. Folk music is often thought of as an endangered genre, and in the music of the Penguin Cafe Orchestra, we're reminded of its vitality and its fragility. A large part of this comes in the way minimalist repetition, which is often associated with a static view of time, is juxtaposed with the dynamic, very human quality of folk. In Perpetuum Mobile, literally translating as perpetual motion, the clockwork regularity of the main piano riff, seemingly borrowed from Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, check out my video on that for more info by the way, is balanced by swelling strings building to mini climaxes punctuated by tense, diminished chords, threatening to disrupt the song's cyclical momentum. The technological regularity of minimalism, there even in the regular tones of a telephone, seem able to go on forever, but the organic movements of the performers, complete with faults and idiosyncrasies, are certainly not replicable. In fact, the Penguin Cafe Orchestra itself can't really be spoken of as a constant entity, as their records and performances were undertaken by a revolving door of musicians. The only constant component at its centre was Simon Jeffs. In 1988, a ballet was commissioned based on 8 of Jeff's pieces written for the Penguin Cafe Orchestra. Titled Still Life at the Penguin Cafe, it consists of a series of vignettes, each dedicated to a different group facing extinction, including an Amazonian rainforest tribe. The music is light and energetic, with the choreography and costumes evoking children's cartoons. But the concluding act unites all these disparate cultures into a single, stark narrative resolution. As a storm engulfs the stage, all the creatures board a biblical ark to escape the oncoming flood, their fate uncertain, the danger unabated. This is music that knows its days are numbered. Jeffs died in 1997 of a brain tumour at the age of 48. With the heart and mind of the group gone, the orchestra disbanded that year. Their music captures the beauty of spontaneity, of forgotten gems given new life, always played with an air of melancholy, haunted by the knowledge that it could and would soon all be over. Listening to a Penguin Cafe record is like playing around in a junkyard or browsing in an antique shop. It's full of second-hand ideas, artefacts that have grown worn and tatty with use, that risk falling out of existence altogether. But Jeff's creativity reminds us that the change that occurs when we use things, despite wearing away at the idea of the original, ultimately yields something new, just as each play of a record leaves new marks and blips. Things mutate. Melodies that originate in one song emerge in a new shape several years down the line, extending the genealogy of the folk music they channeled. Jeff's son Arthur, who now heads a spiritual successor to the group named Penguin Cafe, has referred to each song as a friendly and familiar animal. Recording has preserved them, fossilised them maybe, but as part of the longer chain of reinterpretation and performance, let's hope the many musical strands in their composition continue to mutate and grow.